So I'm reviewing the Porsche Taycan this week and we wanted to show off the cool fast charging capabilities of this thing. We were gonna wait until a little bit later in the day to show off how quickly you can add range to this thing. Unfortunately, I had just a little too much fun earlier in the week and range dropped to the point where we weren't comfortable waiting. So we decided to start the day at one of these quick charging stations for a quick top up before we head out. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, for the sake of transparency, we wanted to show you exactly how this shoot is gonna play out. So I'll see you in 5.5 minutes. I'll tell you, on my list of things I'd rather not have happen during a review of an electric car, rain ranks pretty highly, but here we are. And here we are, the 2020 Porsche Taycan. A lot of people out there are comparing this thing to the Tesla Model S, but I just don't see it. I mean, sure, they're both lightning fast, have 4 doors, and run on nothing but electrons, but that's about where the similarities end. And don't forget, this thing's a Porsche, and there's a lot going on to back up that badge. Rest assured, Tesla fans, I'm not here to disparage your beloved brand or the Model S. In fact, I think both have done more than their fair share for both EV development and adoption. But I'm not going to make this a Tesla versus Taycan thing because it's really not. And just think about it. If you're in the market for a Mercedes S-Class, you're not going to cross-shop it against a Porsche Panamera. Oh, and speaking of the Panamera, if you think this is basically just one of those with an electric powertrain, you are dead wrong. If this was like any other model in the Porsche lineup, it would be like the Cayman with a couple extra doors bolted to the back. And those doors are a bit of an interesting situation because they're a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. On one hand, I do kind of wish they weren't along for the ride, but I also understand that if they weren't there, Porsche wouldn't sell as many of these things. And they are pretty easy to ignore from the driver's seat, but it's nice to be able to bring your family out if you want to. The other thing is they give the car a little bit more length, which gives it a bigger battery pack. So why do I say this is more Cayman than 911? Well, it all comes down to one word, and that is balance. Think about it, you've got this battery tray that spans the entire floor of the car, and that's bookended by electric motors and transmissions between the front and rear axles. Then there's a bunch of cooling equipment too, and it all creates just an incredible weight distribution and a very low center of gravity. So forget every cliche you've heard about a car riding on rails because this redefines it, and it's unlike anything I have ever experienced before. There's obviously more than just that low center of gravity at work here though, and I have to say this suspension and steering setup is absolutely flawless. Now because I'm in the Turbo S model, this thing's got rear wheel steering and it really helps to shrink the car. I know that's a cliche too, but there's honestly no other way to describe it. This thing is about the same size as a Panamera, but it feels a lot more like a Cayman when you push it through a corner. It's really impressive just how tiny this feels, and again, that helps you forget that that back seat is there altogether. This suspension I'm rolling around on really is the cream of the Porsche crop, and it's got just about everything the brand offers. There's Porsche's active suspension management system, 4D chassis control, and air suspension at all 4 corners. That means you can raise and lower the car at will, but it's also got a whole network of sensors that are monitoring movements and adjusting without you even noticing. It's really impressive just how poised this car is, and I really think that's the key word to remember here. It's not just that it's firm, it's not just that it's sharp, it's that it's very poised, very controllable, and very usable. But really, it's this steering setup that impresses me the most, and this thing changes direction so quickly. It just darts around like a water bug as soon as you give it input. It just responds so quickly. I can't get over it, and I really think this is about as dialed as you could make an electric vehicle, and this is something that no other EV can compete with. There is some stuff you can play with in here, of course, because this is a Porsche. So you can adjust the suspension through normal, sport, and sport plus modes. Obviously, they get stiffer as you go, and they also adjust the ride height. Now, speaking of that ride height, it is pretty cool how it works. Because it's an air suspension, you can raise and lower the car at will. If you have it in Sport Plus mode, well, it sits at its lowest setting, which is about 22 millimeters lower than normal. But the other cool thing is that if you put it in its range extending drive mode, it lowers to that lowest setting as well to help it slip through the air just that much better. You can either run through the drive modes through the infotainment system or using this little dial on the steering wheel. There's Sport Plus, Sport, Individual, Normal, and a range mode. Now, of course, those adjust things like the suspension and chassis control as well as the powertrain. Now that range extender mode, it's actually really cool, and I like it more than I thought I would. I've been using it most of this week, and it's really cool because it doesn't just modify the way the throttle responds, but it also modifies the way the power is delivered. So it accelerates with a rear bias just like every other drive mode, but once you reach cruising altitude, it switches to a front wheel drive setup, so it's a little bit more efficient. And that's how I've been able to eke out all kinds of extra range in this thing. And I'm really impressed with just how much better it does than Porsche advertises. It really is the classic undersell here because Porsche says this thing should get about 310 kilometers to a single charge, but I have been doing way better than that this week. And I hit almost 400 kilometers before I topped up this morning. That's really impressive stuff. If you think about it, that's like a 25 to 50% improvement. And it's not like I've just been babying this thing all week. I've been doing a bunch of launches. I've had it in Sport Plus mode, but with a nice balance of that range mode, there's no reason you should have to charge this thing every night if you don't have access to a charger. Okay, let's talk power. Now, this thing has the same net output as the Taycan Turbo. There's 616 horsepower from these two electric motors. But since the one I'm driving is the Turbo S, I've got an overboost to 750 horsepower and 774 pound-feet of torque. Absolutely ridiculous. And since it's electric power, it is so quick to respond. Porsche says this thing will do 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in less than 3 seconds, which is ridiculous, and there's also no reason to doubt the accuracy of that. Even out here on a day like today with all of this rain, this thing is doing that sprint without even batting an eye. The other cool thing about the Taycan is that it's got repeatable performance. You don't have to worry about this electrical system overheating, which is a problem in some other EVs. This thing just goes non-stop, and I've been doing all kinds of launches over and over again, and I'm consistently getting less than 3-second sprints to 100 kilometers an hour. It's very impressive. Seriously though, this might be the easiest launch control that's ever been installed in a car. All you have to do is hold down the brake and accelerator pedals at the same time, set this thing to Sport Plus mode, and off you go. As long as you've got juice in the battery, this thing will launch as many times as you want it to. Again, repeatable performance. It's got all this great cooling equipment too, so when you have it in Sport Plus mode, you can hear all the fans running to keep all that electrical equipment nice and cool and ready for the next launch. But the cool thing is that no matter which drive mode you're in, this thing will still take off and give you supercar beating quickness. So in that range mode, cruising around in front wheel drive, if you want to pass someone on the highway, drop the hammer and it'll do it no problem. Though I will point out that it does limit the top speed to 120 kilometers an hour. A bit of a bummer when you're trying to pass someone and it kind of dies out on you, but trust me, it does come in handy because it is very easy to break the law in this car. I really like that even in this range extending mode, you still have access to all that acceleration when you need it. Now, it will limit your top speed to 120 kilometers an hour, and that does come pretty quickly. So it can be a little bit disconcerting when all of a sudden it feels like you have no power at all until you realize that you are in this eco mode. But it is cool that it doesn't restrict throttle response like so many other eco modes out there. So if you need that passing power, it's there for you. But something else I like about cruising around in this Taycan, whether you're talking about Sport Plus mode or range mode, is that the temptation to constantly jam on that accelerator pedal just isn't there like it is with an internal combustion car. Take a look at that Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk I drove a few weeks ago. You have that exhaust noise, that supercharger, all of that pent up fury. It's just egging you on, whereas this thing is so silent and serene that you're just as comfortable cruising around, enjoying the sights, as you are dropping that hammer and letting this thing fly. Whether you're talking about efficiency or performance, something that really helps the Taycan stand out is that it's got an 800-volt electrical system, whereas most EVs have a 400-volt system. And that's also how you can charge this thing so quickly. Like I said off the top of this video, I needed to top up the range just a little bit because I had a little too much fun earlier in the week. But I was able to add that 100 kilometers of range that Porsche advertises in about 5.5 minutes, which is really impressive. Now, full disclosure, I decided to put it back on the charger for half an hour just to give me enough range to be able to finish this shoot without worry. But even then, I only used a half an hour interval and I was able to push this thing up to 94% capacity. That is very impressive. Now, I personally still get range anxiety because I own internal combustion cars instead of electric ones. And that's the type of thing that goes away with time, or you just learn to live with it. But being able to hit one of those fast chargers makes it go away pretty quickly, especially when you can get up to over 90% charge in half an hour. Well, it makes range anxiety a thing of the past. But I will say, if there's one thing holding this back, it's that there aren't too many of those chargers available. Now, Electrify Canada, in partnership with Porsche Canada, says there will be 32 installed across the country by the end of 2020, which is decent, but it's also not anywhere near as many as Tesla's got going. There's more than 32 in Ontario alone, and now you're talking about 32 across the country. Well, I do think that could hold some potential buyers back. The last thing I'll say about those chargers is that every Taycan sold in Canada includes a free 3-year subscription to the Electrify Canada network, so you can hit any one of those fast chargers. But I will point out there is a little bit of a catch, in that for every half an hour interval, you have to wait an hour before you use the charger again, which can be problematic. And if you go over, well, there's no forgiveness. When I plugged in this morning, it was fine, but the app showed me a different time remaining than the charger. So when it hit half an hour on the charger, but my app still said 29 minutes, well, I got hit with a marginal charge. It's not that big of a deal, though it does feel a little bit shady and just a little bit unfortunate that they're going to nickel and dime you on one of those free subscriptions. If you're trying to get people to adopt EVs and use their charging network, that's not a way to endear yourself. Whether you're talking about the Electrify Canada app or any of the other electric charging network apps out there, that's just the tip of the tech iceberg in this Taycan. There's also a Porsche Connect app, so you can do things like precondition the cabin or set charge times all from your phone. But really, there's just a little too much tech going on, and I don't just mean because of all those apps you need. When you look in here, there are so many touchscreens, and it's all just a little bit confusing to get used to. It's not too bad once you get comfortable, but until then, you might feel just a little bit overwhelmed. There are these touch sensors on either side of the gauge cluster and the digital gauge cluster itself that you can reconfigure and move things around as you see fit. There's also this central touchscreen, and that gives you your infotainment controls, including Apple CarPlay, but there's this lower touchscreen that I'm not so crazy about, and it's how you have to control just about everything you want to. From climate control to your different settings, you've got to access them all through this little panel down here. One problem I have is that it's very prone to fingerprints and streaks. But another beef I have is that when you use the climate control, well, you've got a basic system down here, but if you want to access anything further or turn it off, you have to hit this AC menu button up here, and that'll pull it up on the central display. Another thing to point out is that there's no Android Auto just yet, so iPhone users will be happy, but Android users not so much. There's also a voice control function, which is more gimmicky than anything else, but it is a quick way to set your temperature or check how much battery juice you have left. Hey Porsche.
How can I help you?
What's my charge status?
You still have 81% battery charge and can drive 344 kilometers.
Everything else about this cabin puts the driver first though, and I absolutely love it. You feel nice and connected with the car. These seats are incredibly comfortable, and this red leather upholstery is absolutely fantastic. If you're in the market for a Taycan and you pick anything but this red leather, I never want to talk to you again. It's just too good to pass up. When you're cruising around in this thing, it just feels like a driver's car, and it feels like a Porsche even if there isn't that familiar flat six sound. but you just feel so connected, and a big reason why is this steering. Like I said earlier, it's so precise and this thing carves such a tight line. I love driving it. This car weighs over 5,000 pounds, but you'd have no idea from this driver's seat. And a big reason why is that electric powertrain, yes, but also the suspension, the steering, and these brakes. They just bite so hard. Now, because I'm in the Turbo S, they are carbon ceramics, and I wouldn't want to pay to replace them, but they are nice to have. There's also a regen function that you can activate through this button on the steering wheel to put just a little bit more juice back in the battery. Okay, so let's talk price. The cheapest version of the Taycan is the 4S, and that'll set you back 120 grand before taxes and fees. Then there's the Turbo, and that starts at 174 grand, or you've got this Turbo S for 214 grand before the government gets its share. The one I'm driving is spec'd out to 240 grand, which is a lot of money, but honestly, it's worth it compared to just about anything in this price range. If you're looking at something like the Porsche 911 Turbo S or a McLaren, I honestly think I'd have a hard time picking anything but this. I know they are very different cars, but this thing is just so well-rounded. You're just getting so much car for the money. But I think the thing that surprised me the most is just how easy it is to drive this thing in a civilized manner. And it gives it a whole other dimension of enjoyment. But the good news is, it's ready to have some fun at a moment's notice. To recap, I love the Taycan's ride and handling, impressive acceleration, and surprising range. I don't like how few and far between the fast chargers are, how complex the infotainment system is, or the excessive touch controls. I really think Porsche nailed this one. Not that I was expecting anything less, but it couldn't have been easy to build a car with that familiar driver-first feel of a Porsche in an all-electric package. The fact the range is better than advertised, well, that's just icing on the cake. And subscribe! Subscribe!